think confession for you today that I could very comfortably say is I'm the happiest that I've ever been. And that part, to have a partner and a husband who is just so supportive, and to have healthy kids that are so joyful in the freeness of their life and the safety of their life that we create for them, of all the things that have happened in my life, I never would have imagined getting here at this point. I would feel just so happy and grateful, and I really do.
Harry horror show rolled into New York last night, and I say horror show for him because if he was ever worried about being the spare within the royal family, then just take a look at his face here as he arrived at the time event where he was playing second fiddle as ever to his wife. That's the look on his face when he comes to the understanding that he's not going to get any special treatment now that he's simply a little bit of royal arm candy for Ms. Markle.
There are moments in this long, wild saga, the story of Meghan Markle.
Meghan Markle stood on a stage in New York and declared that she was the happiest she had ever been. She spoke with complete ease, saying she had a husband who was deeply supportive, children who were healthy and joyful, and a life shaped by safety, freedom, gratitude, and contentment. Of everything that had happened in her life, she said she never could have imagined arriving at this point and feeling so fulfilled. It was presented as a moment of confidence, warmth, and success, the image of a woman entirely satisfied with the life she had built. Yet the scene landed very differently for many people watching it, especially because of the timing. On that same day, attention had already settled elsewhere. In the Norfolk countryside, far from stages, cameras, and celebrity spectacle, Prince Louis had marked his 7th birthday through a tradition that has become one of the most cherished rituals of the modern monarchy. A new photograph had been released, showing him sitting on a log in soft natural light, wearing a simple blue check shirt, smiling with the kind of open, gap-toothed grin only a child of that age can give. It was a warm, uncomplicated image, gentle and intimate, and it immediately created the sort of affection royal birthday portraits so often inspire. The public response was instant. Across social media and the press, people shared the pictures with delight. They spoke about how much Louis had grown, how much he resembled his father, and how sweet his expression was. It was the sort of moment that belongs wholly to childhood, a reminder of why these yearly birthday photographs matter so much. Every year, Catherine releases a picture of each of her children on their birthdays, and the public receives them not as publicity stunts but as small gifts. They are carefully offered glimpses into family life, warm without being exploitative, personal without feeling intrusive. They allow people to watch these children grow up while preserving a certain dignity around them. Prince Louis's birthday portrait fit perfectly into that tradition. It was affectionate, natural, and full of the simple charm people have come to associate with William and Catherine's family life. That was the atmosphere into which Meghan and Harry arrived in New York for the Time 100 summit. The event itself was prestigious and had been scheduled well in advance. Meghan had not chosen the date because of Louis's birthday. Her appearance had already been arranged, the program was public, and she was there as an invited speaker. On the surface, that would seem enough to settle the matter, but for those who follow Meghan's public life closely, timing is rarely judged in isolation. Meghan is not seen as casual or spontaneous in the way she presents herself. She is regarded as highly managed, highly strategic, and deeply conscious of image. Every appearance, every word, every detail is believed to be calibrated. That is why so many people found it difficult to accept that no one around her would have noticed the significance of the day. Prince Louis's birthday is not private information. It is part of the public royal calendar, known to journalists, commentators, and anyone who follows the family with even moderate attention. That made it hard for critics to believe Meghan's team, with all its care and professional control, would simply overlook the fact that she was stepping onto a global stage on the exact day Louis's birthday portrait would dominate royal news coverage. To some, that alone looked suspicious. To others, it became far more suspicious when Meghan began speaking about her children. She appeared in a tan linen suit and crisp white shirt, polished and composed, embodying the serious entrepreneur image she has been building for years. Harry stood beside her, as he so often does at public events, present but peripheral. Once Meghan began her onstage conversation, the focus was entirely on her. She was there to discuss her podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder, and the conversation opened with a confession of her own. Asked to share something personal, she smiled and said she was the happiest she had ever been. Not happier than in recent years, not happier since leaving royal life, but the happiest of her entire life. That statement landed with force because of everything that had come before it. This was the same woman who had sat opposite Oprah Winfrey and described life inside the royal family as one of isolation, abandonment, and deep emotional crisis. She had spoken of feeling unprotected, unsupported, and driven to a desperate point. Those claims were not minor complaints. They were among the most dramatic and globally discussed revelations of the entire Sussex saga. They shaped public opinion, defined her victimhood narrative, and cast the institution in a devastating light. Now she was sitting in Manhattan saying she was happier than she had ever been, radiating total peace and fulfillment. For many viewers, that raised an uncomfortable question. If this was truly the happiest she had ever been, what did that mean about everything she had said before? Had the earlier suffering been exaggerated, dramatized, or tailored for a particular moment? Had one narrative simply been replaced by another once it no longer served the purpose it once did? Those questions were already swirling when Meghan moved to the moment that ignited the strongest reaction of all. During the conversation, she brought up her son Archie, who was approaching his 6th birthday, and shared a detail that in any ordinary setting might have sounded sweet and harmless. She said Archie was about to lose his first tooth that week and added that, out of everything on her schedule, she hoped to make it home in time for that moment. It was delivered with maternal warmth, the kind of small domestic anecdote that softens a public figure and makes her seem intimate, relatable, and tender. The audience responded exactly as expected. The room smiled. Coverage followed quickly. Meghan the loving mother, Meghan hurrying home for her son, Meghan balancing public life with private devotion. But that comment landed on the precise morning Prince Louis's photographs had already made missing teeth the defining image of the royal news cycle. Louis's gap-toothed smile was everywhere. It was the detail people were already talking about, writing about, and sharing. His missing front teeth were not incidental. They were part of the charm of the photograph, part of what made it feel so purely childlike and so loved. Royal writers were already leaning into that stage of childhood, the loose teeth, the tooth fairy age, the little changes parents rush to remember before they vanish. And then, within hours, Meghan stepped onto a global platform and mentioned her own child's missing tooth. On another day, it would have passed almost unnoticed. On that day, it did not. Her name entered the same news cycle as Louis's. Her child was mentioned alongside him. Her image as a devoted mother began moving through the very same channels that had spent the morning celebrating Catherine's son. The effect was immediate. The focus wobbled, and Meghan stepped into the space where it wobbled. To many observers, that did not look accidental. It looked like a move. Samantha Markle saw it that way without hesitation. Of all the people who speak publicly about Meghan, Samantha occupies one of the most controversial positions. She is her half-sister, which gives her a kind of personal authority few others possess, but it also means everything she says is filtered through accusations of bitterness, jealousy, and self-interest. Those criticisms are serious, and they have followed her for years. Even so, those who support Samantha continue to point to one thing above all. The patterns she identified long ago are the same patterns many more people now believe they can see for themselves. Long before Meghan's documentaries, interviews, and public reinventions made these tendencies seem obvious, Samantha had already been describing a woman skilled at rewriting her own history, using relationships strategically, and placing herself at the center of moments that were never really hers. Seen through Samantha's eyes, the tooth comment was not a charming aside but a familiar tactic. Meghan, in this view, has an instinct for entering moments that belong to someone else and bending attention toward herself. Sometimes she does it loudly, sometimes she does it through a detail so innocent on the surface that criticism seems almost cruel. A mother mentioning her child's first loose tooth sounds harmless. Who would attack that? But that was precisely the elegance of it. It was unimpeachable and effective at the same time. It pulled Meghan and her children into the same emotional current already carrying Louis's birthday. It did exactly what it needed to do while leaving her defenders with a ready-made shield. She had only talked about her son. She had only expressed maternal love. Surely that could not be a crime. What made critics unwilling to dismiss it as coincidence was the larger pattern they believe surrounds Meghan's public life. This was not seen as a one-off moment. It fit into a story they think has repeated itself for years. When Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back from royal duties, it was done suddenly and without the sort of careful coordination such a decision would normally require. Senior members of the family were left to learn of it through the press. When the Oprah interview aired, Prince Philip was in hospital at the age of 99, and the country was already under strain over his condition. The interview still went ahead, flooding the public sphere with allegations against the institution at one of the most sensitive moments imaginable. He died 5 weeks later. Then there was the Netflix documentary. Released during the same week, Catherine was carrying out a major solo engagement in Boston. Her visit had been warmly received, her public image strengthened, and then the documentary dropped and swallowed the entire news cycle. Each time, critics asked the same question: coincidence or design? In that light, Louis's birthday was not treated as an isolated example, but as the latest chapter in a familiar story. Samantha's argument was not merely that Meghan wants attention. It was that attention is the central organizing force of her public life. The need to be the focal point is not occasional or tactical alone, but something deeply wired into her identity. By this reading, Meghan does not simply use media strategy. She lives inside it. She senses where attention is already gathering and moves instinctively toward it. The result is that nothing ever quite feels random. Every word seems to arrive with a purpose. Every anecdote appears to land in exactly the right place. Harry's presence in New York only sharpened the impression. He was there, photographed, dressed well, polite, and physically beside his wife, yet somehow absent from the substance of the event. It was Meghan's invitation, Meghan's stage, Meghan's speech, Meghan's moment. He did not speak. He was not the reason anyone cared that the couple had arrived. He was simply there because she was there. For many royal watchers, that image carried a painful irony. Harry had spent years insisting he could not remain in a role where he was permanently secondary, forever the spare, always in the shadow of his brother. He had walked away from his country, his family, and the institution into which he was born, partly because he rejected being reduced to a supporting figure. Yet there he stood once again, slightly behind, smiling on cue while his wife controlled the cameras in the room, the spare again, only now within his own marriage. That was why some commentators looked at his face and saw not pride or contentment, but despondency. Harry had once been one of the most loved members of the royal family. People saw in him something warm, messy, emotional, and recognizably human. He served in the military, completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, and carried the kind of popularity that made people feel deeply protective of him. Now he seemed to many like a supporting character in a story built around Meghan's reinvention. The contrast was hard to miss. From a strategic perspective, Meghan's summit appearance made perfect sense. She was in the middle of a brand rebuild. Her Netflix show had produced mixed reactions. Her lifestyle brand had drawn attention but also ridicule. Her podcast was still new and not yet firmly established. She needed a reset, and the Time 100 Summit offered exactly the right environment. It was high profile, prestigious, and full of influential people. By simply being there, she projected seriousness, relevance, and social value. Surrounded by executives, stars, philanthropists, and power brokers, she could place herself within a room defined by status and influence. The message was clear. She belonged there. Her words followed the same logic. Saying she was happy countered the chaos and conflict that still clung to her public image. Saying she was grateful softened accusations of entitlement. Speaking as a devoted mother countered questions about priority and authenticity. Presenting herself as a thriving founder pushed back against the idea that the Sussex brand had begun to lose momentum. Every part of the performance served a purpose, and the most effective detail was the one least open to attack: Archie's tooth. What critics called lies were not usually direct factual inventions about the event itself. The more serious accusation was that Meghan's public image does not match the life those closest to her say she actually lives. On stage, she presented herself as the happiest she had ever been, surrounded by loving family, devoted to her children, centered by motherhood, and focused above all on home. Yet the previous stretch of time had been crowded with public commitments, appearances, launches, travel, media projects, and image-building exercises. Through all of it, Archie and Lilibet remained almost entirely hidden from view. They appeared only in carefully controlled glimpses, usually when their presence could reinforce a particular story. Their privacy was tightly guarded, yet references to them surfaced whenever those references helped deepen Meghan's image as a loving mother. That contrast fed Samantha's harshest claims. She believes the language of warmth and closeness in Meghan's life has long functioned as performance rather than proof. In her view, Meghan does not mention her children simply because they are on her mind. She mentions them because doing so serves a narrative purpose. Those are grave accusations, made heavier by the fact that Samantha speaks not as a distant observer, but as someone who says she saw these patterns form long before fame magnified them. Lost within all of this, of course, are the children themselves. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor is 6. Lilibet Diana is 3. They did not choose the circumstances into which they were born. They did not choose royal blood, California, separation from extended family, or the controversy that had already attached itself to their parents before they were old enough to understand anything. Archie's life became entangled with public arguments almost immediately. His birth, his title, his christening, his photographs, and later the allegations surrounding how race had been discussed before he was born, all entered the public arena while he was still too young even to understand language in the way adults do. Now he is old enough to have feelings, preferences, and questions, even if he is not yet old enough to grasp the full meaning of the story around him. One day he will be. He will grow old enough to search his own name, watch the interviews, read the articles, and hear the comments. He will be able to look back at the moment his mother stood on a stage in New York and publicly shared news of his tooth on the morning of his cousin's birthday. He will be able to ask why that was done and what purpose it served. He will be able to consider how much of his childhood was protected and how much of it was used. That possibility gives many people pause, because children eventually understand more than adults often imagine. The palace, meanwhile, says nothing. That silence is one of the clearest parts of the entire picture. Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace do not engage publicly with this kind of thing. They do not correct, argue, or retaliate. They release their photographs, continue their schedules, and move on. That silence is not indifference, it is discipline. To respond would be to elevate the story and confirm that the Sussexes still possess the power to provoke reaction from inside the institution. William and Catherine therefore allowed Louis's birthday to remain what they wanted it to be, their son's day. They did not compete. They did not acknowledge what was happening in New York. They simply carried on, letting the image of a smiling boy on a log speak for itself. That restraint is not easy. Behind closed doors, frustration almost certainly exists. The timing, the repetition, the sense of relentless intrusion into moments that should have been simple family occasions, all of it would strain any human relationship. But the monarchy has chosen no response as its response. It relies on the belief that the public can distinguish between substance and performance, between a child quietly photographed in the countryside and a carefully crafted stage appearance in Manhattan. At the heart of this entire dispute sits one larger claim, that the real Meghan Markle is still not fully visible to much of the world because the performance still works. Samantha believes Meghan's need to remain central is not something she switches on and off, but something much deeper, shaped early, rewarded repeatedly, and now almost automatic. The unsettling part of that analysis is that it leaves open the possibility that Meghan does not experience herself as manipulative at all. If attention-seeking has become instinct rather than plan, then criticism may never alter it, because a person cannot easily correct what she does not truly see. What can be seen clearly is the state of the wider royal relationship. The break between the Sussexes and the rest of the family now appears profound and perhaps permanent. Hopes of reconciliation have not materialized. Time has not healed it. Private diplomacy has not repaired it. King Charles may still love his son and may not have given up entirely, but the conditions for any real restoration have always been difficult. Harry would need to return in some meaningful way, and the public campaign of interviews, documentaries, accusations, and narratives against the institution would have to end. None of that appears close. Harry is in California. His children are in California. Meghan's identity, brand, and opportunities in America are built around the story of escape from a cruel institution. For that story to remain powerful, the institution itself must remain the villain. Seen from a distance, what happened on Louis's birthday was never really about a tooth. It was a compressed version of the entire Sussex conflict. On one side stood the royal family, traditional, restrained, bound by roles and rituals older than anyone alive, releasing a simple photograph of a smiling child and asking for nothing except that people enjoy it. On the other stood Meghan, ambitious, polished, strategic, and certain of her own importance, stepping onto a stage to project happiness, maternal warmth, and professional relevance while ensuring her name entered the same news cycle as her nephew's birthday. Whether that came from deliberate calculation or instinct honed over a lifetime, the contrast could not have been clearer. Her defenders can say, with some justification, that she did not control the date of the summit, did not choose Louis's birthday, and did nothing criminal by mentioning Archie's first tooth. Those are fair points, and the story is not simple, but Samantha's view cuts through all of that with brutal clarity. Nothing in Meghan's public life, she believes, is accidental. Nothing is unplanned. Nothing is merely spontaneous. On the morning the world was looking at Prince Louis, Meghan made sure the world was also looking at her. Prince Louis turned 7 that day. He had what was almost certainly a real birthday, private and noisy and full of cake, family, and the sweet chaos that belongs to children. His parents captured a smile they will treasure for the rest of their lives, and the public was lucky enough to share in it for a moment. He has no idea that, for a few hours that morning, his birthday became part of something larger and more complicated. Perhaps that is exactly as it should be. He is 7. Somewhere in Montecito, Archie was losing his first tooth at roughly the same time, also a child moving through one of the ordinary little milestones of growing up. But his moment did not stay private. It traveled across headlines and television segments and comment threads, heard far beyond the walls of his own home. 2 boys, 2 missing teeth, 2 utterly different childhoods unfolding under the long shadow of monarchy, media, family breakdown, and relentless narrative management. Between a log in Norfolk and a stage in New York, the story of this royal era continued to write itself. And in the middle of it all remains the same uneasy conclusion. Prince Louis deserved that morning to be entirely his. Whether he got to keep it is something the news cycle answered all by itself.